There is very much this sense that the India comparison no longer holds because there's nothing to compare. They are not at the same level. So benchmarking the two against each other is wishful thinking on the part of India and perhaps some Western countries who would like to use India as a way of containing China. In the early 1990s, our GDP per capita was roughly similar. Today, China's is 5 times more than India's. It is like by far technological leader when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to green technologies, when it comes to really high value added kinds of technologies. It's no longer this workshop of the world just making buttons and the spectacles and these kind of light manufacturing commodities. Those days have gone, and they very much see themselves as rule setters, norm setters, and they see India's geopolitical ambitions as being misplaced. I'm told time and again that India should settle its house in order, develop your economy first, actually lift up your people, and then start talking about these geopolitical issues.
今天想先跟大家分享一段印度人自己的反思，不是中国人说的，是印度学者自己说的。他说一个在北京生活了近10年的印度资深记者最近写了一篇文章，讲他回到中国后的感受。他去了宁夏，中国 GDP 最低的省份之一，最穷的地方。他本来想终于能看到贫困了，结果摩托车、冰箱、彩电，在他看来这已经是印度中产阶级的标准。他还走遍了中国3、4、5线的城市，96%的中国人有医保，高铁把所有地方连在一起，公共空间好到面目全非。然后他对着自己的同胞说了一句话：中国人看不起我们是应该的。这句话说得很重，但更重要的是他接下来的分析。他说中国人对印度的看不起，不是因为印度穷，而是因为印度骨子里有一种甘当西方马前卒的基因。印度人为英国殖民者在上海当巡捕，今天呢，印度人挤进4方安全对话，继续充当西方遏制中国的工具，敬重自立自强的对手，但绝不可能平视一个把灵魂抵押给外部势力的附庸。今天这期我们就一起拆解一下这位印度记者到底说了什么，为什么他的话在印度知识界引起了轩然大波，以及中印之间的认知断层到底是怎么形成的。
There's this, we now also, of course, have a lot of netizens, which you did not have 20 years ago. So on WeChat, and there's a huge number of sort of troll armies similar to what you have in India that are constantly putting India down as a trash-filled dystopia.
Are they pushed by the party?
I think that they're not pushed by the party, but they are not discouraged by the party.
You said that they become more cosmopolitan.
More cosmopolitan, more confident, and more open, more aware of the world.
Do you see a visible change in the standard of living, in the lifestyle? And is it, you see, we went as tourists, and that I told you was 20 years ago. I didn't see a single poor person. There was no
visible poverty,
no Jhuggi Jhompri cluster.
So you went back in 2000. So even in the 2000s, as an Indian, I was always looking for visible poverty, right? Because we see visible poverty when we look outside our window. And I kept sort of in Beijing saying, where is this? I eventually joined a bunch of journalists on almost like what was like a poverty porn reporting trip, where we went to the poorest province in China, which is Ningxia province. It's on the border with Mongolia, and it has the lowest GDP and so on. And we went to visit a village which had essentially been under desertification for several years, with the result that almost all young people had left, and it was supposed to be one of the poorest villages in China, and just a few old people left over there. So I thought finally I'll see this poverty, because all this while I hadn't been seeing poverty in any Indian sense of the word at all. And we arrived at this village. It took us quite a long time to get there, and most of the Western journalists were very happy to finally see this poor place and were asking questions. But I was looking at this place, firstly outside the poorest place in China, there was a motorbike parked. We went inside and they had a DVD player, they had a fan, there were all these white goods. There was a fridge, chota wala fridge. And here in India, that would be middle class, with the possession of these white goods is like one of the ways in which we measure. And this is back in 2006. So, I think in India, we often have this narrative of, oh, don't believe what you see. It's only Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou. Yeah. I have, for the last year, been traveling to 3rd and 4th tier cities because I plan to write a book about these. And most of them are connected by high-speed rail to begin with, which is just mind-blowing because the connectivity makes such a huge difference to how the economy functions. 96% of the Chinese population today has health insurance, including in rural areas. They have it's a kind of complex of different forms of health insurance, but every single person I've spoken to is covered, and public spaces have improved beyond recognition. The pollution that used to plague Beijing, skies are clear. There are places there which used to look like the Ganda Nala in Defense Colony, and now you have people swimming in them and doing water sports. So just the public spaces are unrecognizable, and this I've seen across the board, including in much smaller cities. You will have really, really good infrastructure, which leads to a very improved quality of life.
So they look down on us deservedly.
Yes. We I think, have failed our citizens. We have failed our citizens. We have failed to provide urban infrastructure. We have failed to provide sanitary conditions. We have failed to provide the conditions in which people can be healthy, from the air to the water to the medical system. We failed in, I feel, even creating a sense of people feeling like they are equal to each other as citizens of the country. Instead,
we have created a generation of cockroaches. That speaks for itself, huh, Mani?
It does indeed, but at the same time, we used to resent, at least my generation used to resent, the superiority of the imperial forces because they were so far advanced over us and would therefore hark back to a golden past. So it does seem that these Chinese, according to the account you've just given, believe that because they have reached Western standards of living, they should look down on poor people. But they look down particularly on Indians. I don't think they look down on Africans.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I actually do not think that they look down on Africans. It's Indians because they feel that there's a kind of hubris in India and that India positions itself as an equal. So they are quite into the idea of, for example, they have incredible green, very, very cheap and excellent quality renewable technology in terms of solar farms, in terms of wind energy. And they've been exporting huge amounts of this to Africa and to Pakistan. I keep meeting Chinese who say, why don't India take it? Why doesn't India leverage China's economy right next door to actually improve India's economy and then start talking about all these geostrategic things? There is a sense that they are essentially playing a game of being with the West to contain China. And so a lot of that attitude towards India has to do with this sense that we are not to be trusted because ultimately it's not about the poverty, it's about the trying to, through the power of the West, unfairly inflate our strategic power.
That is what is more credible to me, that we are seen as Western lackeys.
Yes.
And that links up with the impression that the Chinese of the 19th century had about us. And there was a period in the 1950s when they looked in a very brotherly way towards us. It was the era of Hindi Chini bye bye, because it looked as if we were attempting to reinforce their liberation through our own independence. But increasingly, especially after we embarked on economic reforms and this pivot to the West, they see us as agents of the West, not because we are poor, but because we are lackeys, that they're looking down upon us. And the only way of changing that is to clearly indicate to them that you are a more important partner for us than the West is.
So I absolutely agree with you that there is a deep historical undercurrent in China, which if you read the sort of late 19th century writers who were sort of grappling with modernity and trying to understand how to reform the Qing Empire, etc., they would always look at India as like the worst scenario, where this is a kind of colonized mind. The Chinese don't particularly harp on about that. However, there is a new pejorative that has emerged on the internet, and that is Asan, and they keep calling Indians Asan, okay? Asan was a term that was really used in the 1920s and 30s in Hong Kong and Shanghai to talk about the Sikh policeman. Okay, and then it's not very clear why.
What does it mean?
Yes, it's not very, very clear what it means, but there are various theories, and I think the most credible one, just means like Mr. So, son third, okay, son means third. So, Mr. Third, why? Because in the hierarchy, it was like white man number 1, Chinese number 2, the Indian number 3 in that colonial hierarchy in these treaty ports. So, now Asan has come out like a bad word, it's like a slur. And whenever they want to talk about, this is again not official Chinese discourse, but netizen Chinese discourse. Whenever they want to talk about India supposedly licking the nether regions of the West, they will term us as Asan, which is like the comprador, the lackey, the person always willing to do
and
the white man's.
Symbolized by the Quad.
The Quad.
We are the only non-Pacific country in the Quad.
And
although we say that we are not part of the military dimensions of Quad, the fact is that Quad is designed to contain the Chinese.
That's right, and they see that, and they see that whatever we say that it's our strategic autonomy is disingenuous, that this is very much a China containment strategy. I think a big change also happened after the nuclear energy deal. That was under George Bush when we got the waiver, and then that they saw India as going quite firmly into the West's orbit, and there has been a change, I think, at the official level on how they see India. They do not see India as being a good faith actor because ultimately they will side with the US. And that was, I think, a key turning point.
When we started our economic reforms, and I was in Parliament at that time, there was a deep belief in India, especially among economists, that we can't kickstart it ourselves. We have to have a lot of assistance from abroad. And abroad meant the West. And then 1962 came into our minds, and we said, but certainly not from the East, when the East really means China. And it is this disjuncture between our real requirements, which can easily be met from our continental neighbors, instead of going across 2 oceans to discover all that. How is it that the Indians did not recognize in time the Chinese potential? And when they did, instead of admiring them, we seem to be envying them. We seem to be jealous. We seem to think it is illegitimate for them to be so far ahead of us.
No, and part of this narrative that we do not mentally accept that we have lagged behind is because there was so much stress on democratic way of life and democracy as the main achievement of modern India, which we felt China lacked, in fact, fell on the other side, a very repressive regime. So we thought we are superior. How is that viewed in China?
Yeah, I think they see Indian democracy as a disaster and as a kind of cautionary tale that if we had democracy, we'd be like India. So this is something they've been saying for quite a long time, because they keep saying things like, why is there no garbage? Why is the garbage not being collected? Why are there people on the footpath, etc.? What do we say? We are democratic is the answer. No, and I mean, I think for them, our democracy has really been about identity politics and essentially like different kinds of groups using democracy as a way of gaining boons from the state, rather than sort of building a proper civil society where everybody is a citizen and you work towards how the country develops. In China, there is a counterintuitive situation, which is that one would imagine that in a democracy, the government would be more responsive to the people's demands, right? But in China, they are not a democracy. However, I think the government is more responsive to the people's demands
today. To the government's demands.
No, I also think it's the government is very nervous about any kind of people's movement, and hence they tend to be actually very responsive to the people's demands. They are a government of performance rather than process. Okay, we are very much about process. The process of elections is what gives legitimacy to our governments, that they have been elected, not their performance. Whether they actually fulfill their promises is not what gives them legitimacy or not. They can say anything, we'll clean the air, we'll do this, we'll do that. Nobody holds them to that standard, because it's the process of getting elected. You know, we kind of like our ostriches, and this kind of disbelieving and sort of pretending that what's happening in China is not real. What is it serving? You know, it's just serving to kind of justify our own dysfunction. And instead of sort of seeing that it is possible to emerge out of all kinds of dysfunction and huge amounts. China has had a very tumultuous 20th and 21st century, and they paid a huge price for it. But today, I think that for almost all Chinese people, life is better. And unfortunately, when you look at India 25 years ago and today, and especially in urban contexts, not only has the kind of standard of living declined, but also the quality of our democracy, the quality of our freedom of speech, the quality of our institutional freedoms, which you were saying, we might have said 25 years ago, okay, China is an authoritarian country, but we have all of these things. Today, I feel like we have like the worst of both worlds. We have a kind of authoritarianism with diarrhea deaths. Together, we've got the worst of the authoritarianism and the sort of downsides of an electoral democracy.
好了，我们首先看一组数据啊。1990年代初啊，中国和印度的人均 GDP 大致相当，都是几百美元的水平。但是30年后的今天啊，中国啊是印度的5倍，不是略微领先，是5倍，这是一个量级的差距了。中国在人工智能、绿色技术、高附加值产业上领跑全球，印度还在争论我们应该跟谁结盟。而这位记者说了一句话，我觉得特别到位。他说中国已经不是当年的世界工厂了，他们在设定规则，而印度还在幻想自己是个平等的对手。他还举了一个例子，每次他遇到中国朋友对方都会问类似的问题：印度为什么不先把自己的经济搞好？为什么不先解决14亿人的吃饭、教育、医疗问题，然后才开始谈地缘政治呢？中国人的潜台词是你连自己家都收拾不好，你凭什么到外面去争霸？接下来这位记者重点讲到了他的宁夏之行。2006年，他跟一群记者去宁夏，中国 GDP 最低的省份之一，一个被沙漠化困扰多年的地方。他以为这次终于能看到真正的贫穷了，但是结果呢？他进了一个村子，中国最贫困的村子之一，村口停着摩托车，屋里呢摆着 DVD、冰箱、彩电。在印度这些是中产阶级的标志他在中国最穷的地方看到了印度中产阶级的生活水平。他后来还在全国各地跑，3、4、5线城市，他都看到了什么呢？他看到了96%的中国人有医保，包括农村地区。高铁把最偏远的城市连在了一起，公共空间面目全非。以前像贫民窟的地方，现在有人在湖里游泳，玩水上运动。他说了这么一句话：在中国生活了10年，我越来越难找到我在印度熟悉的那种贫困了。这绝对不是炫耀，这是一个印度记者面对事实的坦诚。那问题来了，为什么中国人在心理上对印度的看不起比对待非洲还严重这位记者的回答也很有意思。他说不是因为印度穷是因为印度装给大家拆解一下他的逻辑第一，印度总把自己当成中国的平等对手，但在中国人看来，这完全是错位。你的人均 GDP 是中国的1/5，你的高铁是0，你的医保覆盖率不到1半，你凭什么是我们的对手？第二，印度总想不接地气的谈战略，中国人在想，你先把老百姓的饭管好，水管好，厕所修好，再谈地缘政治行不行第三也是最重要的，印度骨子里有一种买办基因。19世纪，英国殖民者在上海租界里雇佣了大量的印度巡抚，他们在上海街头拿着警棍，为英国维护秩序，对付中国人。今天呢，印度加入四方安全对话，充当美国遏制中国的工具，在中国人看来，这是同一个剧本的翻版。他们又一次把自己绑在了西方遏制亚洲大陆的战车上。中国人敬重那些自立自强的对手，但绝不可能平视一个把灵魂抵押给外部势力的附庸这位记者还触及了一个特别敏感的话题，民主。印度人一直有一个根深蒂固的自信，我们是民主国家，中国不是，所以最终我们会赢。但这位记者他是怎么说的？他说，在中国的环境下，你不民主，但政府反而对人民的诉求更敏感。为什么？他用这样的话给大家做了解释。他说在印度，选举是合法性的来源，你赢了选举，你就合法了。至于你上台以后干没干事儿，有没有兑现承诺，那是另一回事，因为合法性来自过程而不是结果。但在中国，合法性来自绩效， 政府必须解决实际问题，修路架桥、建医院、搞医保，才能维持人民的支持。这位记者说了一句特别狠的话，我们拥有最坏的两种东西，独裁主义的坏处和民主的坏处。你既没有享受到效率，也没有享受到自由，你既没有中国的发展速度，也没有西方那种真正的权利保障。这位记者还提到了一段特别让人惋惜的历史1990年代初，邓小平先生曾展现出极大的历史胸襟，提议搁置争议，按照现状解决边界问题。这是一个巨大的善意以当时中国的国力和国际处境，提出这个方案是真诚的、务实的。但印度当时的精英阶层沉浸在一种莫名其妙的主导地位错觉里，傲慢地拒绝了。他们以为时间站在他们那边，他们以为中国的一党制迟早会崩溃，他们以为民主会自动让他们赢。40年过去了，时间没有站在他们那边，当年的那扇谈判大门现在也已经彻底关上了。今天中国不需要向任何人做出无谓的妥协，包括一个连基础卫生和城市管网都无法自理的邻居。说到这想聊一个可能有些观众好奇的问题，为什么中国网友会叫印度阿三？记者也提到了这个词，它的来历其实挺沉重的。19世纪到20世纪初，上海租界里大量使用印度巡捕，英国殖民者雇佣的锡克族警察，他们在上海街头为英国人维持秩序。当时上海人管这些印度人叫红头阿三，因为他们头巾是红色的。这个词的背后是一个殖民时代的权力结构，白人是主人，印度人是打手，中国人是被看管的对象。今天当中国用阿三这个词的时候，其实是在调用这段历史记忆。你又一次站在了西方那边，这不是单纯的歧视这是对一个历史角色的警惕和拒绝。最后这位记者谈到了印度社会的鸵鸟心态他说印度人用网络上的极端排外和虚幻自尊来麻痹自己，假装邻国的崛起并不存在。他举了一个例子，中国在绿色能源领域已经全球领先，太阳能、风能、储能价格极其便宜，品质呢极其优秀。中国把这些技术出口到非洲、巴基斯坦，甚至全世界。中国朋友问他，印度就在旁边，你们为什么不买？你们为什么不利用我们的技术来改善自己的基础设施？答案也很简单因为买中国的在印度是个政治不正确的行为，印度宁愿花更高的价钱从西方进口，也不愿接受邻国已经领先的事实。这绝对不是经济决策了，这是属于心理防御的范畴了。最后想用一段话来收尾。1990年代中印站在了相似的起点上。30年后的今天一个造出了高铁，探了火星，建了空间站，铺设了全球最完整的工业链，另一个在讨论我们该不该跟中国做生意。这位记者说了一句话，我印象特别深。他说，当一列列高铁在中国的崇山峻岭间呼啸而过，当新一代中国青年身穿传统服饰从容平视世界，那个曾经幻想着共建亚洲世界的旧梦早就被现实抛在了身后。这不是对印度的嘲笑，这是一个诚实的印度人对自己国家命运的叹息。有些国家的崛起靠的是人民和实干，有些国家的停滞靠的是傲慢和幻觉。而我们能做的是继续走好自己的路，同时保持清醒，知道别人怎么想我们，为什么这么想我们。好了，本期视频就到这里，感谢大家收看。